It's just like, I don't know, for me, the energy in a casino is just kind of like ick, you know? And so I'm like, let's go be with the ick. So yeah, so I threw everything in the back of my car and I was driving and I could feel him watching me. Like, because I always revered this man as if he was God. And so it's not like, within my awareness, all of a sudden his power disappeared. No, his power was still there, even though I was discarding him. And so it was almost like I had to put all the pictures face down so I couldn't see his eyes. And then when I got there, it took like I was shaking. I was shaking because I felt like he was right there watching me the whole time. And so finally I got out. I was able to open the trunk. I started throwing all these things into the dumpster. And there was this large photograph, and it was the one that I had kept on my altar, and it was massive. And it was the last one that I threw into the dumpster. And when I threw it in, it hit the side of the dumpster and it like ricocheted off and flew onto the cement. Glass shattered everywhere. I felt so much fear and so much power at the same time. Right. And so I picked up the frame and the photograph and I threw them back in the dumpster and it landed. Even as I drove home after that, I remember thinking like, not not even thinking, but like grasping with my mind for an anchor, for something to hold on to. And so I just remember thinking to myself, like, you've got everything you need inside of you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to bring you a really special guest today and somebody very dear to my heart, Chanchal Garg. Chanchal is one of my clients. We worked together for a couple of years, and today we'll be talking about her brand new book, Unearthed. I can't wait to get into that. Just as a brief introduction, Chanchal is a speaker, now an author, an executive coach, and conscious leadership facilitator. So welcome, Chanchal. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jas. I'm really excited to do this with you as well.
Me too. Well, we will get into the book very soon, but just as a quick little introduction, could you share one thing that really lights you up in your day-to-day life and one thing that really lights you up in your, I guess, in your career, in your work life?
Sure, sure. I would say in my personal life, it's definitely my children. I've got a 13-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, and watching them grow up and break their own patterns and find their own way is really just such a joy. And yeah, I think they're the ones who put a smile on my face every day. Yeah. Let's see, in my work life, I would say, when I am, whether I'm facilitating a group, whether I'm working with someone one-on-one, the thing that lights me up the most is when someone sort of has an aha moment where they recognize, like, oh, I actually have the answer to what I need, or I actually have what I need that I'm looking for. I don't need to look externally. That moment when they sort of recognize their own power is always such a joy for me. I think it's why I do the work that I do, and it's what lights me up in any engagement.
Yeah, I really, really resonate with that. It's that moment of leading them to recognize what's already inside of them,
Yes.
which, we all have the ability to do that. And it's just, it takes time and it takes a lot of vulnerability as well to be able to learn how to really sit with yourself, really go deep enough to go, I know what to do here, or I know what I need, or whatever the next step is. I think when people learn more about your book as well, it will make so much sense why you wrote this book and why you do what you do, because that's a huge message within Unearthed as well, is about really tuning into who we are and rediscovering who we are without all of the labels of what people have told us to be or who they've said we should be and all those sorts of things. And I do want to dive right into it because I'm really excited to talk about the book. I hoped I was going to have my copy here, but it's not here yet. Otherwise, I would be showing it off. But can you just share with me, I mean, it was 2022 when you first came to me with ideas about this book. And I'm just really curious, what do you remember about
Oh my
2022
gosh.
version of Chanchal and the book? Can you even just, I guess, kind of share, like when you came to me, what were some of the things that you were thinking about and what was swirling around in your brain at that time, good and bad?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had written very little at that point. I don't think I knew the arc of my own story. I wasn't even sure exactly, what the messaging was. Like I knew what my heart said. I knew that there was like this calling that I felt that something needed to come out, something needed to get out on paper and get out into the world because I could feel myself healing from within my own story. And I started seeing themes of my story within the women that I was coaching and within organizations that I was leading. I started seeing these themes that were very similar. My experience was pretty extreme, but like the themes are very universal. And so I knew something needed to get out there. I just didn't know exactly what that arc was, what it was going to look like. And so when I came to you, it was kind of like, I've got this thing. I want to put it out in the world. Help me. And then there was another piece of it too, right? Because my story is so personal. And there was this other part of me that was like, I just want to write this for my children. I just want them to know who I am as a woman. I want them to not be plagued by the silence from the women in my lineage, and the way that their silence has sort of shaped them and future generations. And I wanted them to know how to not only speak up and use their voice, but I wanted them to know how to break the patterns that they're seeing that need to be broken to sort of continue that healing on. So, in some ways, I didn't know whether I was going to finish or I was going to publish it. I didn't know if I would be able to use it for my business or not. I didn't know any of these things. And so coming to you and you just sort of encouraged me to just start writing, just find the stories that are most meaningful and write and sort of trust the process. And that was really great for me because, there wasn't really like a desired outcome from that perspective. We just sort of started writing these stories. And as I did, like some stories had more power than others. And when you sort of pointed out to me, I can't even remember how many years in, like, oh, we've got an arc. I was like, what? What are you talking about? We just have a bunch of stories.
Yeah.
So yes, it was.
It was so interesting how it came together. And I'm actually really glad you brought up that point about just starting the process, writing, and seeing what came out of it. Because so much of the fear that people have around writing a book is that they don't know where to start. And then there's the, would anybody even want to read this? Is anyone going to care? And, how do I put together my like experiences from my personal life and also tie it in with my business in a way that's going to make sense and draw people in and all those sorts of things. But sometimes you really do just have to forget about all of that for a while.
Mm,
And unless you're writing a business book or a how-to kind of book and you know
yeah.
exactly what structure you're going with. But otherwise, sometimes you do just have to really take an intuitive process with it and just write until that art comes out, which takes time. And it kind of goes against what a lot of people in the business world or even the book coaching world will tell you, which is like, no, you must have your idea, start with it, write it in, 48 hours or write it in a week or write it in 30 days. Like I see all these
Yeah.
various challenges and I'm just like, doesn't work for me, doesn't work for a lot of people I've worked with. You need the time to be able to really sit with yourself and your story and all the stories from your life and work out where is it going? Like, what's the arc or the hero's journey that you want to take people on? And I remember it did take a little bit longer with your book, but watching that transformation was just, such a blessing and a real honor because when you got to that, which we'll talk about, like when you got to that, idea of, okay, this is, or that real confirmation of this is what I'm doing, this is what I really want to come out of the book, then, you just ran with that because
Hmm.
you had that real solid foundation then. And I was actually looking back through some of our first emails because I wanted to try and find some of our initial videos, but I couldn't find them. But I found your initial email when you reached out to me. And I remember in that you were talking about the fear of like, what will other people say? What will people think? And that was a really big one. So I wanted to ask you, looking back now as a published
Hmm.
author, what do you think was either the catalyst moment or what do you think the little things, like what shifted along the way? Was there a particular moment where you were like, all right, no, I don't feel that fear anymore? Or was it
Hmm.
a gradual shifting through the process?
That's such a great question. I don't think there was a single moment that it shifted. And honestly, I'm still dealing with it. The book's only been out for what, 2.5 weeks now. And it's really interesting because I think this is a very, and you shared this with me too before, that it's such a common thing for authors to feel like, what are other people going to think of me? And, there's other people in my story and all of this. And within the Indian culture itself, there's this saying, log kya kahenge, right? Like, what will other people say? It's just a foundational saying in my culture, right? And so it was a big deal. And the thing that was really important to me was that the other people that I was portraying in my story were portrayed as humans, right? And that I wasn't demonizing anybody that wasn't worthy of being demonized. There was one person in my book, right?
There's one person that definitely
Yeah,
deserves to be demonized.
yeah, yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. There's obviously, I know the story, and in a moment, I'd like to get you to share more about the actual story for those listening. But yeah, you were very gracious in the way that you delved into certain relationships with other people and, the mistakes they made, but like you said, not demonizing them.
Yeah, just making sure that everybody looked human because we all are flawed, right? And so being able to portray that was really important to me. And then beyond that, of like, what will other people say? Yeah, I mean, there was definitely that fear. I think there's still that fear. And at the end of the day, I think it's about not necessarily, at least for me, not overcoming it, but recognizing that
Mm,
my power actually comes from sitting with my fear and being with it and sort of doing it anyway.
yeah.
And
And that's
that's,
far more relatable for other women like yourself who are reading the book, other Indian or women of color who are reading the book, to go, yeah, Chanchal's not someone who's standing here going, yeah, I don't give a F anymore. I don't care about anything.
no,
Nothing scares me. It's far more relatable to see someone go, yeah, I do still have fears about certain people
yeah,
reading it. And I would like to ask you about that in a moment. But before we do, can you just share briefly a little bit about what Unearthed is about and the
mhm,
story that eventually that came out from that
yeah,
initial conversation that we had in 2022?
yeah, absolutely. So it's about my journey through spiritual and sexual abuse and the healing from it. And so the arc of the story is really all of the cultural grooming and what I like to call this belief in the myth of being good, and good being defined by external entities around us, right? And sort of falling into that trap sort of made it possible for this assault to happen. And then the actual assault. And then the majority of the book is actually the healing from it and the reclamation of myself from this event, or from these events. And as I wrote the book, the healing was still happening, as you know, right? There's so many events that happened as I wrote the book that are in the book. And so that's sort of the arc of it. And my hope is that other people can see themselves in this story, maybe not in the extremes that I experienced. But again, as we mentioned earlier, sort of the universal themes that I think do apply.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no part of your story that isn't timely or relevant already. But when we look at some of the things that have been going on in the news lately, and obviously the Diddy trial, things like
Yeah,
that, it really is such an important book for people to read. And as you were just saying, then your hope is that others will see themselves in the story. My hope is that people who also don't have much of an understanding of, say,
yeah,
spiritual abuse or emotional abuse will come to read your book or be told about it through somebody else. Because one of the most frustrating things for me throughout very public trials like the Sean Combs trial is seeing the people saying, why didn't she just leave? You could
oh
have
my
left
goodness,
so
yeah,
much earlier. And that's the thing. In most cases, you're seeing an unequal power dynamic, whether it's a famous relationship or an everyday, community member's experience. There's so often this unequal power dynamic, and that's something that people will really see as they read through Unearthed as well. Your particular story centers around this relationship with this guru, this spiritual guru. And so, of course, you were going to listen to him. Of course, you were going to take his advice because he's somebody who's meant to be an upstanding citizen. He's meant to be somebody that is the kind of person that you look to within your faith, someone that can guide you, somebody who's a mentor. There's also, if you look at the Sean Combs trial and also parallels within your story, there's usually quite large age gaps as well. There's large gaps in life experience. We're not talking about two people who got together at the age of 40, have a whole, say 40, have a whole life before them with a career, plenty of life experience, and then they suddenly find themselves in a relationship with someone that's being abusive and they go, oh, I recognize what's going on here. I'm going to get out. And so I really hope people that also don't have much of an understanding will come to read books like yours and come to read books like mine and other people who've done work in these areas to get a better understanding of how perpetrators work and that it is a long-term grooming process. And what I wanted to
100%.
circle back to when we were talking about fear, now that Unearthed is out there, have you found yourself thinking much about that guru and that person? Or what are your thoughts, fears, or any of those things?
Yeah, no, I don't find myself thinking about him as much. I have thought about the people in the community a little bit, and I'm sure there'll be at some point. At some point, I will come face to face with someone in that community, right? I'm sure that will happen at some point. And I think the beauty of being able to write a book like this, it's like I'm not interested in allegations or any sort of I'm not trying to accuse someone of anything, right? I am speaking from my own perspective and I'm talking about my own lived experience. And through that, I'm hoping to raise awareness, right? And so, yes, there's fear of oh my gosh, what if I bump into this person or this person or this person? And at the end of the day, if I do, I do. It's I don't know. I mean, what are they going to say? I'm sure people will have things to say, but at the end of the day, that intimidation, I'm hoping that I'm at a place now where I can be like that. It's not even relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I just paused because my husband just came in and I can hear that he's talking loudly. So I'm just going to be real and send him a quick text, sorry, and just say,
No worries.
I'm on a call. Can you please keep it down? He's working from home today.
No problem.
Just don't want people to be like, why is she distracted during Chanchal's very important conversation here? Yeah, I think there is a beauty that comes out too as well. There's a strength that comes through as we write or as we get closer to finishing the book. And as you said, it doesn't mean the fears go away, but when you focus on sharing your experience, your particular lived experiences, the healing, what it's focused on your story. It's less about them. Of course, they're a part of it. And I remember I'm sure we had similar conversations when you were writing the book about what it was like for me as well, writing my books and especially my memoir.
Yes.
It wasn't that I never thought about that person. And of course, I had to talk about that person within the context of the book, but it was more about what was the impact on me and then how did I work to heal that?
Exactly.
How did I get to where I am today? And that's exactly what your book is about too. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it does have such a strong focus on healing because we need that in lived experience books. And unfortunately, not everybody does that. You've got your sort of trauma memoirs that are just more about the traumatic experiences and less about the hope. But that's what you need. For anyone else out there who's listening or watching along that wants to write a book or wants to write a memoir or is writing a memoir, you do really need to focus on the healing or the work that you've done to get to where you are today. And with that person, yeah, I'm glad that you found that strength through the writing process, that it is now less about him and it's more about your journey and being able to stand up and speak out for other women and hopefully empower them to come forward as well or to recognize patterns that need to be broken. I'm sure there was much more I wanted to say about that, but I also want to encourage people to read the book and sort of not give too much away.
Yeah.
But I will just say I haven't come across very many books about spiritual abuse, or particularly with, you know, sort of cult like environments and gurus and things like that. So, you know, Unearthed is just such an important book. And I'm so glad that you kept working through all those fears and those challenges to get to this stage where it's out there, because it is such an important book and
Yeah.
a topic that we don't, I guess, hear as much about. Do you, I guess, when you think about other books out there, have you come across very many stories like this, or particularly amongst Indian women or women of color as well?
I don't know that I've seen that many that are about spiritual abuse, particularly. I think there are one or two. Um, yeah, I don't know of many that are out there. I know that, in general, I think people are starting to speak up more and more, because it's definitely not unique to the Indian culture, right? I think this is happening across the board, and it's, as much as it's related to the religious or spiritual aspect, it's power dynamics, right? Like, I always say, I don't know that I would consider myself necessarily a religious person, but definitely a spiritual person, and I'm really grateful that this experience couldn't take that from me. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about power dynamics. I was thinking about this, even as you were talking about like my relationship with the abuser. Like when I think about the abuser, or anybody who's talked about in a memoir like this, I feel like it's a representation for a thing, for like this force that's out in society that as women we're dealing with, right, when we're dealing with these issues. And so it's not necessarily even one person anymore. It's a phenomenon that we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me, and I'm sure I probably mentioned this to you as well, but for anyone listening, there's a really great YouTube podcast show out there, and it's called Not the Good Girl. And it focuses a lot on different cults, also MLMs and things like that as well, but specifically on different kinds of cult leaders or religious and spiritual gurus and guides. And I forget her name, but the channel, yeah, it's called Not the Good Girl. And it's so interesting to hear through her deep dive, sort of 1 hour documentaries, to really see how these people use spirituality or religion to trap people in ways that a lot of us, even sometimes I watch along, how could you get trapped into this? But yeah, I do think out of all of the different forms of abuse, spiritual abuse might be the one that I find is the least understood, or maybe not as commonly talked about. Obviously, everybody's kind of well aware of what physical abuse entails, what that looks like. We're doing a much better job now of understanding emotional abuse and what that entails. Still a lot of work there. I think financial and religious abuse, spiritual abuse, are the ones that we need, the areas where we need more voices like yours. And yeah, it's very interesting. For those who read the book, once you read it, you'll understand a lot more what we're talking about. But it's so important to understand the way that these abusers and perpetrators work, and that they do work themselves into high, positions of power, positions of privilege,
Absolutely.
and they become trusted people within the community or within these, religious kind of groups.
Absolutely.
So it will be interesting. Sorry, you go on.
No, I was just going to say, like, and as you read the book, it'll become clear, like when you think about religious abuse, it seems like there might be these telltale signs of someone who would, be this way. But there were moments where he would say things where it's like, no, actually, you're empowering me. You're helping me to see myself. Like he would know exactly what to say and when, right? And so it it's very insidious, and it's very hard to see at first. Like the grooming is real.
And can you share just briefly how old you were when the guru came into your life?
So I was 14 when I first met him, and the actual assaults did not happen until I was 26.
Yeah. So that gives such a good indication for people listening about the way that grooming works and why we don't see it when it eventually happens. Because it didn't happen when you were 14, it didn't happen when you were 15.
Nope, no. Jazz, I'm really sorry. My son is blasting music. Are you able to hear this?
No, not really. That's all good. We go on despite husband's talking noisily or what, children in the background. Yeah, I just can't wait for people to read your story. Again, like I'm trying not to give too much away, but what were some of the things, I guess, as you worked through your story and you found yourself writing through there, what were some of the things that you recognized that were really important in your healing? Um, obviously you talk about it in the book, but what were some of the things that helped you with getting out of that situation and then beginning the healing process and understanding what happened to you? And I ask that because spiritual abuse is such a tricky web to untangle in our minds, and it takes a long time. So maybe if you could also share, how long was it before you kind of were able to name it for what it was? And then what were some of the things that helped you in that process of getting out of that and beginning to rebuild?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, in my culture and religion, they're sort of intertwined. So it's sometimes hard to see like what's culture and what's religion. But one of the teachings is that you are not your body. And so within that teaching, it's, and then at the same time, right, I come from a culture where yoga was created, right, which is all about the body. And yet we're not the body. And so I think what happened for me is I really internalized that message. And so any sort of messages that were coming to me from my body, like this isn't right or this doesn't feel comfortable, I began to silence. And it wasn't just that teaching. It was also because when I did try to voice it, the adults in my life were like, no, that's not what it is. You're not seeing the intention, or you're not seeing this, or you're not seeing that, right? And so I think with all of those things, it was silenced. When I started practicing the physical practice of yoga later on in my life, and I started actually becoming aware of my body and the signals that my body was sending, I used to say, like, being able to move my pinky toe on command is not just a party trick, right? Like, it's actually inhabiting all of my body. And so I think once I started doing that, the messages my body was sending me became louder and louder. And so it was that. And then also when I was pregnant with my daughter and I was teaching a yoga class, that all of a sudden I was teaching this class and I was like telling my students, you need to check to see, is your practice serving you? And in that moment, it was like I had like this, like, I can't believe I just said that moment. Like I had to check to see, like, is my practice serving me? And then it was like my body and my daughter and like everything just got really, really loud, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I had to sort of challenge some of these beliefs that I had been raised with, and start listening. So that was sort of like the catalyst. There was more to your question, and I feel like I lost some of that, but that was the catalyst.
And yoga was also a really big part of your healing journey as well, wasn't it?
It was just because, like I said, it was an opportunity for me to be with me, for me to hear my own inner wisdom, that was coming from my body, and to be able to actually listen to that. I think as women, so often we're told, like, you need to look good, but not necessarily listen to the vessel that's supposed to look good, right? So it was a huge change for me to actually start paying attention to the messages inside versus just what other people were telling me or what I had understood I needed to do and be to be worthy.
And there's one story that was just coming up for me as I thought about that transformation that you made. And I would love if you could share a little bit about that moment with the photograph, because that, to me, was just so powerful. And I think that will give people a really good indication as well of like that reclamation of your life, but also how scary it is when you walk away from these kinds of people. So can you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So once I had sort of had this understanding, and I had shared with, my mom and my dad and a few other people who were really important in my life, and it was very clear that they did not, I don't know if it was like too much, or they just couldn't understand what I was trying to tell them in terms of the fact that I had been assaulted sexually, spiritually, all of this. And so it became really clear I had to do this on my own. And so I was in my house, I gathered all the pictures, and we had massive photographs of this man in our house. And so I took all these photographs down. I went through my diaries, got all the pictures and everything. And I didn't want to throw them away in our garbage can in our home, because my daughter, she was going to be born, I think, maybe 6 weeks from then, something like that, but 6 weeks out from my due date. I didn't want him anywhere near me. And so I decided to dispose of all these photographs and mementos in the dumpster behind the casino, which was like 15 minutes from my home. I don't know, this just came. So I threw
Was that
everything
just quickly, was that something you just randomly chose? Like, had you ever been in that area before or to the casino or anything like that?
around it. And it's just like, I don't know, for me, the energy in a casino is just kind of like ick,
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
You're like,
that
you're going where you belong and dumping
exactly, that's kind of how it
trash at
felt.
the
I'm like,
casino.
let's go be with the ick. So yeah, so I threw everything in the back of my car and I was driving and I could feel him watching me. Like, because I always revered this man as if he was God. And so it's not like, within my awareness, all of a sudden his power disappeared. No, his power was still there, even though I was discarding him.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like I had to put all the pictures face down so I couldn't see his eyes. And then when I got there, it took like I was shaking. I was shaking because I felt like he was right there watching me the whole time. And so finally I got out. I was able to open the trunk. I started throwing all these things into the dumpster. And there was this large photograph, and it was the one that I had kept on my altar, and it was massive. And it was the last one that I threw into the dumpster. And when I threw it in, it hit the side of the dumpster and it like ricocheted off and flew onto the cement. Glass shattered everywhere. And I was, you know, when you're sort of already in this mindset of like, I'm being watched and I shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be here and then that happens, I'm just like, I was terrified. And I talk about this in my talks a lot too. Like, I think that was a moment where I felt so much fear and so much power at the same time. Right. And so I picked up the frame and the photograph and I threw them back in the dumpster and it landed. But yeah, I was just terrified. And like, even as I drove home after that, I remember thinking like, not even thinking, but like grasping with my mind for an anchor, for something to hold on to, because like all of the teachings and the mantras and the practices that I had used in my entire life were given to me by him. And so it was like
Mm-hmm.
all of that just felt like it was tainted now, it was gone. And
Yeah.
so I just remember thinking to myself, like, you've got everything you need inside of you.
I was
And
about to ask you that because I was going to say you must have felt so lost in that moment because here you are trying to extricate yourself from this abusive person, but then at the same time, naturally your mind wants to go back to, it wants to look for guidance, and then you naturally go to look for it from the teachings you've had from him. So I wanted to get into
yeah,
that a little bit too. Like how did you begin to look within yourself and to cut, I guess, like in spiritual practices they'd say do like cord cutting, but how did you begin to like cut away from looking to the guru or people in his community? What helped you to begin looking inside, and what kinds of questions did you ask of yourself?
yeah. I think at first I didn't know how. And so, like this belief that I was telling you about, like you've got everything inside of you. I remember thinking like, I don't even know if I fully believe that. Right. I'm just going to keep repeating it and hope it works. Right. But I remember like there were times, especially when I was alone, where I would almost feel his presence around me. And there were times where I would just start screaming, like, just leave me alone, like, go away. It was almost like I had to hear my own voice and my own power telling him no, like, you have to leave energetically. So that was definitely one. I think beyond that, it was also like just starting to journal, just starting to like feel myself, like start to feel like what's true for me. And this idea of grounding, I often say this to my clients now, like if you've ever been in those conversations where you have a conversation with someone and you leave and afterwards you're in a completely different mood and you realize that that's not really your mood, you actually took on the mood of the person you were talking to, right? And what I tell people is like, if you're not in your body, then other people's emotions can actually enter your body, right? So this practice of being grounded and having my awareness stay in my body was almost sort of a protection in many ways for me to just be me and be who I am. So it was like just randomly feeling my feet on the ground, walking around outside barefoot, laying on the ground, right? Just trying to stay with myself and my own experience rather than what other people were telling me. And, at that time, I was very much alone because there was no one who really understood what I was dealing with. And anyone who I had said anything to, they questioned my experience. And so I often say to people, like if I look at my companions during that time, I would say my companions were probably rage and grief. And those aren't things that many people want around them. But for me, I feel like they held me and almost protected me in a way until I was ready to voice my truth in places where I could actually be heard.
That's so powerful. There's so many of us who've walked that path as well, where we've really had to figure it out for ourselves, and that's why I believe books are so important. I know a lot of people, there's certain people who will say they're not being as read as much as they used to be, but I think protecting books, having libraries is so important because it's the only way that we hear these kinds of messages that can help others, help make the journey a little bit less hard or a little bit less long for others, because people like yourself, like me, we had to work it out ourselves.
Yep.
So I'm really excited for people to read through the book and find out more about how to listen to that voice inside, or how to start feeling grounded in yourself and searching for those answers within. I guess to jump forward a little bit now that the book's out there, what are some of the, I guess, most beautiful messages, or what are some of the messages you've received since the book's come out that have meant the most to you? And how does it feel now when you look back and you think of that 2022 version of yourself who was scared and didn't know whether she even wanted to publish a book?
Yeah.
You thought maybe you'd just keep it for yourself or share it with your kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share like any of those messages that you've received and how it feels now to be on the other side?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty surreal. I've received messages from folks telling me that they now see their mother in a different light. One in particular who told me they can now see their mother as an ancestor who's kind of on her own journey. And she's sort of able to let go of some of the issues in her relationship with her mother. That was really impactful for me to hear. Some other folks who have said, I wish I had this book to give to my younger self, when I was going through whatever it was that they were going through. Someone else who said, this book is really a gem when it comes to intergenerational trauma and breaking those patterns, which has been my dream, right? Like that is really what I want to be able to do in my own lineage, and hopefully be able to guide others to do the same in their lineage. So all of these messages have been so powerful. And then there's been some, from friends or people who I haven't met in a while, and I'll get this message being like, oh my gosh, I just read your book, and now this thing that you did made so much sense, or the way you showed up in this group, like I can see why you showed up that way, or like all of those things. And that's really cool, right? As well, just to be able to be seen in that way. And then to also have them sort of reflect back. I can see sort of the teaching in it. I can see the lesson in it. I can see why it was important for you to show up that way as well. So yeah, it's been pretty amazing to see all of that. And every time I feel extremely humbled, and I think I made a post about this the other day too. Like one friend called me and they're like, oh, you wrote a book, now you're an expert. I'm like, that's an interesting thing, because I think we're all experts in our own lived experience, right? And it made me think back to all the times when people challenged me on my own lived experience. And I think as women, that's something that we all go through, right? Like especially when you live through any sort of trauma, people are like, was it really that bad? Or is that really what happened? Or come on now, and it's crazy how people think that they can challenge an experience that they haven't lived through.
Yeah. Or maybe they have had a similar experience, but it's been very different. It's played out very differently.
Yeah.
They haven't had your specific experience, but they've had some experiences around that. And they're like, oh, it's not a big deal. Exactly like you said, oh, was it really that bad? I went through that, and you just pick yourself up and you keep going, which are those messages those intergenerational messages, especially. that we really want to break through. And that is a huge part of your book too, that we haven't gotten into, but there's so much in your book about intergenerational relationships and the messages that are passed on that are not particularly helpful, trauma that's passed down. And there's some beautiful stories in there as well about reclaiming your identity and specifically reclaiming your name. I don't know if you, maybe we'll leave that for people that want to read the book, but can you just share whatever you want to share, or as much as you'd like to share about that, about what's in a name, really, which is
Yeah.
that section of the book.
Yeah. Well, when I was born, I was named by my parents and my grandfather. Um, and then I was renamed by my abuser. And so as I was letting him go, as I was sort of doing my own process of reclamation, I had to go through a whole thing where I found a name for myself, and that name that I was able to find and reclaim sort of reconnected me to my own spirituality and my own lineage in a way that was really beautiful. And so, yeah, I was grateful for that. And I also just want to say that I think the process of writing this book helped me to have that experience as well, because I think there were so many experiences that I had, as I mentioned earlier, that I don't know if I would have been ready for had I not have written as far as I did, because the writing process helps you to process your own experiences in such a way, right? And so, yeah, especially the last year and a half or so before the book came out, there were so many of these sorts of experiences that I think came through, and my name was one of them.
That was such a powerful journey to go on with you, or to sort of witness. So I'm excited for people to read about that as well. There's two more questions I want to ask you. One kind of ties in with what you were just talking about, the process of writing. For anybody out there who's looking to write their memoir or write their nonfiction book, what would you like to share to them about the importance, or the, I guess, how much it helps to work with, say, a book coach? Or like, when you look back now and you think, if you were to have done this by yourself, how do you
Yeah.
think the process would have gone?
I don't think I would be here.
Yeah, you don't think the book would be here? Yeah.
No, I don't think the book would be here. I think the process of, especially a memoir, right? Because it's just so personal. And, when I know for me, when I started writing the memoir, it's like, okay, I've gone through a certain amount of healing. I'm ready to write it. Yeah, that was hogwash, because the process of writing brings so much more healing. And to work with someone, and not just any book coach either, I have to say this, right? Like, you are someone who has not only written your own memoir, but you have worked with other women, especially, who have written theirs. So you've walked with women as they've processed their trauma, right? And I'm not saying it's therapist work, but there's a way in which you're able to hold space for the things that come up during that process. And I think having that container along with the accountability to write the book is so important. And I mean, there's so many things I appreciated about this process, but one of the biggest ones were you weren't afraid at times to tell me, I think you need to put it down. I think you need to take a break. You held me accountable, but you also held me accountable to the processing and the rest that I needed. And there's not many people, I think, who would do that. Most people would say, just power through. You're writing a book, you've got a deadline, get it done. And because you did that, not only do I have a book, but I have a more healed self as a part of this journey.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's funny because I have forgotten about that part of it. I mean, my style has never been pushing people. Like, there's a certain amount of holding people accountable. And, there were definitely moments, like you said, where I had to do that with you and go, okay, remember you said by this date you wanted to be here. But there are also times where you do just need to put it down, because if you keep pushing at it from that, whatever mindset you're in it, like whatever you're going through at the time, you've got to recognize those moments where you do actually have to walk away for a bit, whether it's like a couple of days, whether it's a few weeks, whatever it might be, and come back to it with fresh eyes, or with a bit of a, when you're in a different kind of different mindset, depending on what you might be experiencing in your personal life. So I really appreciate you saying that, because I'd sort of forgotten that there were times where I did that as well. Like you said, most of us don't think about that. We just think about powering through. And that's the message in coaching spaces that we're told is just keep going, just keep going.
Yeah.
But it's just, yeah, I like to ask people about their experiences of working with a book coach, whether it was with me, whether it was somebody else, because I do believe that it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how good you are at written language, whatever it might be. It's very hard to see around your own blind spots. It's very hard to see things within your story that need to come out that only somebody else can see through the process of kind of gently unpacking your life experiences and things like that. And it's the same reason that, I'm working on a new book at the moment, and I worked with someone to edit the introduction, to help me write the synopsis, to help me write the pitch for publishers, because I just went, I just can't, I just don't know what I don't know. Obviously, I'm a person with a certain amount of intelligence to have written, 4 books. Obviously, I understand how to write, understand how to tell stories. I can, I'm really good at editing as well. But when it comes to editing my own work, there's things that I'm just not going to see. And we're not talking specifically about typos, there's things within the story that need to come out that we just can't see. And so I'm all for encouraging people where they can to work with somebody, whether it's the editor, whether it's help with writing the book synopsis, whether it is ghostwriting the book or helping with coaching someone through the process of writing the book, which is what we worked through. And now here you are, it took time, but you worked at your speed and you walked through the journey as well that you needed to walk through, because that was a big part of it as well. It wasn't just about writing the book, it was about the journey. And now here you are with, your debut memoir published, which I can't wait for everyone to read. Have you got a copy there with you? You can hold it.
Let me grab it. Hang on.
I want to show everyone the cover. So grab that for a second. And then when Chanchal comes back as well, we'll share where you can get a copy of the book. It is, of course, on Amazon. You can find it on there. It's called Unearthed. And here is the beautiful cover. In a moment, I'll get Chanchal to hold it up. Here we go. Here's the beautiful cover. Unearthed, the lies we carry and the truths they bury. And you worked with someone on that book cover too, didn't you? When we talk about the importance of working with experts.
Yes, absolutely. Worked with someone on the book cover. I worked with 3 different editors at the end of the day. So yeah, it's important to get help where you need it.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, before we finish up, can you just tell, I'll get you to share in a moment where people can get the book, but I kind of wanted to wrap up just by asking, for anybody out there who's listening who does have an experience like yours or has experienced spiritual abuse, maybe they're still going through it at the moment or elements of it, what's the message that you would most want to share with someone who's walking your journey or has walked your journey?
I think the first step is really acknowledging it to yourself. And that's really scary. It's so scary because it's like the person or the organization or the cult or whatever it is that I have had so much faith in to run my life, in the way that I wanted to run it is maybe not what I thought it was. And so being able to acknowledge that to yourself is scary, and it is the first step. And know that you don't have to find your voice all at once. It can be in little bits. I like to say it's a muscle, not a moment. So it's small little bits, but continue to acknowledge to yourself what's happening. Know that you have everything you need inside of you, including your voice. Your voice might just be waiting for that moment where it's safe to speak up, and that's okay. But trust yourself. Trust yourself. Like at the end of the day, mine was with a guru. I don't think you can have a better guru than your own spirit.
I love that. That's so powerful. Thank you. So where can people go if they want to find a copy of Unearthed, or, if they want to speak with you about speaking at an event that they have or anything like that, or working with you through your coaching program? Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is www.chanchalgarg.com.
I'll drop that in the comments as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and I have my coaching information there, my speaker sheets, all the places to buy the book. It's available in all the places where people buy books. So yeah, I'd love to hear from folks.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, some of your journey and about the process behind the book. Obviously, in wherever people are watching this, there's a little summary of the book as well, because today I just wanted to get kind of really into the behind the scenes of it, and that journey, that emotional journey and that mental journey that you had to go on as well with the book. But thank you so much for sharing with us. And I can't wait for people to go and read a copy of Unearthed. And yeah, if you have read a copy, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, or if you've got any other questions for Chanchal, just drop them below and I'm sure she will get back to you.
Thanks so much, Jas. This was so much fun. Thank you.